This is episode 5 of the Three Buddy Problem, a podcast on security conversations. My name is Naraine. It is Friday, July 19th, and unless you've been sitting under a rock, we have a big news today to discuss. We had a show all laid out, and all the plans changed overnight. Let me say hello to the guys. Good morning, Costin. How are you?
Hey, good morning. Doing great. How are you?
Juanito, you're still over at SummerCon. How are you, my friend?
I'm good. I'm in New York. Just I thought SummerCon was going to be the biggest thing on my mind today, but apparently that's not in the cards. So happy to be here.
Yeah, we thought the AT&T shooter story and all the shenanigans around the phone was going to be a big story for us to follow up on, and who the guy was and all of that. Obviously, all of that is out of the road. Costin,
I'm sorry, bro. No. Did you just glossed over like the presidential candidate assassination attempt? We're just gonna gloss over that bit because
we were going to get to that.
Outage.
That was the big story. But
I'm
now
just saying the world is weird, man.
CrowdStrike shipped a software update that blew screen computers worldwide. I mean, it's the most significant thing. Costin, you think this is at the level of WannaCry, NotPetya, kind of global outage?
Yeah, probably on the same level. Although I wouldn't be quick to blame just CrowdStrike for this, or at least not CrowdStrike directly. I mean, CrowdStrike is for sure a very big company, but I don't think they are this big. So the other thing that people were talking about was that Microsoft 365 was down, and there's like an interesting timing here. I'm not saying that two incidents are related, although they may very well be, but they're very close to each other.
Slow down. Can we just kind of back up slowly? What happened? Costin, what happened? What do we know officially as of right now?
Like this morning, I was sleeping and I hear my wife talking very loudly on the phone with the IT support in India. So I wake up and say like, hey, what's going on? And she's like, look, computer is blue. Problem. I say, okay, let's see. So I look like the blue screen, it turns very fast. So you don't get to see exactly what crashes. So
I'm sorry, your wife is a CrowdStrike user?
My wife's company, well, the company where she works, big American company, they use CrowdStrike as well as some other things.
Finish the story. So
yeah, let me finish the story. I don't have CrowdStrike on my computer, like no problem for me. But for like sometimes, when your wife has a problem, that's a bigger problem than your own computer having a problem. So like I take a photo of the blue screen, so very quickly, and this CS agent.sys. So immediately I think like this can't be CrowdStrike agent, must be something else, because the last time I checked she was running McAfee. But I go to Google, and well, actually what I see is that I have in the browser I have Twitter X open, and already in the Twitter feed there's people talking about CrowdStrike. So I'm like, okay, this is not just you. It must be big. And then I realized, it's pretty much everywhere. I think Troy Hunt was the first who raised the issue on Twitter, and now it looked like it was quite a big issue. So I tried to fix it. I couldn't, because her laptop is encrypted with BitLocker, and only the people in India have the BitLocker key. So it took a while to fix it. But yeah, the fix was, to be honest, was not that difficult. Once you have the BitLocker key, you just have to delete a sys file, a driver,
and reboot, and the machine comes back
just
up.
Reboot the machine, correct.
But Costin, you raise a good point, and Juan, I want you to jump in here. I didn't imagine CrowdStrike was this big. Delta is out of flying 911 things, airlines, media houses. Is CrowdStrike that big, or is it possible there's some sort of... Here's my thing is, they asked, George Kurtz was just on CNBC, and they asked him, well, here, tell me about Azure. How is Azure affected? And he seemed to be hedging. He seemed to be hedging a bit there. And my suspicion is that Azure might be a CrowdStrike customer, and they're now affecting downstream customers. Is there any sort of, what is the connection between why is the Microsoft outage, blue screens, and CrowdStrike?
I don't know that there is one. Like, just referring to the clip on CNBC that you're referring to, I mean, I feel for George in that he's clearly trying to explain a relatively complicated technical problem that anyone in the endpoint industry is relatively familiar with. Like, let's be honest, right? Anyone,
people,
trying to explain it to stock market, trying to explain it to Jim Cramer, who looks like
He
It
just
looks like
woke
he
up as
died
well.
like 10 years ago. And like explaining that can't be easy. So when they started asking about Azure, what I saw him was kind of hedging on not just kind of riding cowboy and saying something that was gonna be interpreted the wrong way. So personally, I don't think these two things are related. I think these two things can just happen, right? Like we've had Azure outages for 5-6 hours in the past. And then to your question about CrowdStrike, I mean, look, CrowdStrike's a big company. They have a huge customer base. They do extremely well. They in many ways have been the incumbent, and I say that as like we're S1 as a competitor. It's basically been S1, Microsoft, and CrowdStrike as sort of like fighting each other at the top of the EDR space for a while. Look, I laugh with the jokes and the memes, but like
This
there's
is the
nothing to
worst day for being
gloat.
an AV. This is the worst day
There's
for being
nothing
an
to gloat
anti-malware
about in this
provider.
situation, right? Like, look, in situations like this, first of all, we've all worked AV before. This kind of thing happens. It has happened to Panda. It has happened to Kaspersky. It has happened to everybody in
Microsoft
the past. Microsoft, it happens to
Defender.
everyone
Yeah.
where, there's a reason you put so much stock into the processes that go around how you deploy signatures, how you deploy updates, why, all of the drama around silent signatures. There's a reason why you try to do quiet testing before you surface things to clients. And then the bigger concern being, what happens if you mess with a system component? What happens if you do some interoperability problem with your software, particularly kernel level, like we're seeing now, where you create instability in the operating system? Like that is a quintessential engineering perennial panic attack that you live in when you work in this kind of software. So it's not a fun time for anyone, and frankly, it could happen to just about everyone. That's why you put so much into like the procedures that go into your rollouts, into staging. Oh, we're going to do the rollout first within the company, then to these specific environments that only have people that work with us. Then you do it maybe to a smaller subset of customers. Then you wait for 3 days. Then you roll out to everybody, right? Like there's this idea of
So
staging
you're
that.
suggesting that none of this happened? Costin, how does something like this happen? How does csagent.sys get out with a bug?
That's a good question. I can't tell you for sure. Well, the only thing that we know is that the world is a very complicated ecosystem. So many times things depend on each other, and like a tiny change somewhere, it turns out that it can affect like the whole ecosystem. Like Juan was saying, normally, security products, they have like multiple levels of testing. So for instance, signature updates, they usually get tested for a couple of hours because there's hourly updates. So there's only like you only have a couple of hours to test those signature updates. Then software updates, usually they get tested for weeks, sometimes even for months. And I think drivers also probably go through the most extensive testing, including from Microsoft. So Microsoft rolled out a program a couple of years ago where they only sign your drivers if they actually go through this certification procedures in which they stress test the driver in many different conditions just to make sure that it doesn't blue screen systems. So how this can happen, I don't know. Maybe CrowdStrike will publish an explanation. The only thing that I have seen is that in the folder where the CrowdStrike driver is located, and actually there was an update to this csagent.sys on July 9. It was compiled on July 9 and was signed by Microsoft on July 9 and only appeared on VirusTotal yesterday. And this is
What does that mean?
csagent.sys, the one that shows up in the blue screen. But in addition to those, to that csagent.sys, there's a bunch of C-000000129- so on.sys, like a smaller files in the range of 40 kilobytes, which seem to be the real culprit, or the ones that together with csagent cause this instability. So lack of testing, probably incompatibility. So maybe it was tested on a version of Windows, but not extensively. Or maybe Microsoft did some other change which they didn't test for, and
There you
together,
go.
yeah, this
Can you
causes
linger
a
there?
cascade
What does that
effect.
mean?
that's the other part that we're not taking into account here, right? What makes this so hard is that Windows is kind of on this rolling updates thing, and it has been, I believe, since the introduction of Windows 10, where if you ask some folks, particularly people that are really invested into making like products like memory acquisition products, incident response type stuff, they absolutely hate the new Microsoft paradigm because you basically, whereas before, going from Windows XP to Vista would have been like a big thing that people had to opt into. As of Windows 10, your operating system is kind of renewing itself every 6 months without any kind of overt change or letting you know that it's happening. So
That's what you're calling the rolling update?
yeah. I mean, like, there's all this stuff that's sort of like getting re-engineered and rejiggered under the hood without you necessarily knowing. And it's got to be pretty terrifying to be a kernel developer in this day and age when Microsoft could very well roll out a big update, or they could roll out some essential change in a structure or some, essential file or compatibility that you depend on, and you might not know. So I'm not saying that's the case here, but you do have to consider that. Yeah. The ground itself is also shifting, right? Like the CrowdStrike devs may have done everything they could to test this, and then Microsoft just so happened to roll out a change, and they push out their update. And I mean, you still have the problem of like, why are you sending this quite so widely right off the bat? But it's not entirely in your control. There are aspects of this that you just have to hedge for.
Costin, you think this is days of recovering? I mean, this is a global problem that's affecting everyday people up and down the thing. I imagine there are hospitals dealing with blue screens. I imagine there's some real world consequences.
Travel,
this is a big
man.
significant.
People are stuck. There's travel problems. Like there's people who are stuck with like flight groundings and whatnot.
Yeah.
Correct. Do you think this is something that, what is your feeling on how long this lasts and what does recovery look like?
Well, based on past experiences like WannaCry, NotPetya, I suspect that by Monday most of the problems should be fixed. But like
so this is going to be a weekend of hard work.
Yeah, complete mitigations and repairs might take maybe a week or two, perhaps.
Costin, when you watched your wife's machine get fixed, because it's a BSOD loop, right? Like it's a blue screen of death loop, which is really what makes it so hard, right? It's not like you just restart the computer, it's going to pull a new update, and then like you're fine.
No.
What did it take? I mean, how bad did it look?
Well, I had to go into safe mode and delete this file. The only reason why this was complicated was because her computer is centrally managed, so you need the BitLocker key, which she didn't have, obviously. So that was the only difficult thing. But otherwise, it took like 3-4 minutes to do the whole thing. Of course,
with
you
an
have to be
IT
careful.
specialist in-house, right?
With the IT specialist in-house, correct. But again, if you have thousands of computers, multiply 3 minutes by thousands, and you have probably either you have to go there physically or rely on some kind of BMC, baseboard management controller, like or VT, Intel VT style desktop remote management software to be able to boot the computer remotely and patch it. So that will take time. But yeah, some people reported that simply rebooting the machine like 100 times, 143 times more specifically, will fix the problem. Because due to delays, whatever, it will have time to update itself. Like in our case, this was not a solution. Because Wi-Fi takes longer to connect, so it will never update itself before it has time to blue screen. But yeah, it's definitely messy and it's definitely very big. But I hope the things will look better by Monday. Of course, not for the people doing all the fixing.
It's probably a stupid question, but is there a window of exposure here now where everything is down that exposes networks to, or the networks are just not working anyway? I mean, is there like is there a window here?
Can't hack a blue screen machine, right? Like somebody was joking. There's memes out there of like, all the in-memory implants that have just gotten removed from all these devices, right? Like there's security is at an all-time high right now.
The other thing which this happens every single time is that cyber criminals, they come late to the party. They start registering domains. CrowdStrike crash, CrowdStrike down, CrowdStrike
That's
fix.
the next phase, right?
That's the next phase, right? And then they start phishing the hell out of everybody. So during the next days, be careful of such domains. CrowdStroke, Wanna CrowdStrike. I don't know what's the best name for the incident. Crash Skid, CrowdStroke, CloudStroke.
Now you're just giving them ideas, man. At this point,
what else is there to say about this story?
I mean, look, there's a lot to say about this story, but if we can zoom out a little bit from CrowdStrike themselves, right? Like, and especially because I do not want to gloat about this situation. Like, this absolutely sucks for a ton of people. It is a bad look for the EDR and AV industry as a whole. It's it's not a nice situation for anyone involved. So anybody who thinks that this is just like one company winning over the other, like, you're absolutely wrong. This is not a good
and your
look
turn
for
is
anyone.
coming next. Your turn will come. I mean, you will deal with some.
Everyone's got some moment where they deal with egg in their face and whatnot, and what you hope for is that you put enough processes in place and you're cautious enough, hopefully not overly cautious, but cautious enough where you're trying to make sure that you can't have great massive impact in a negative way across the board. But there is something to be said for all of these security products are add-ons, and there's a reason why the market share in the AV space is so much higher. Like, it's exponentially higher for Microsoft than it is for S1 or CrowdStrike or anybody else, which is when somebody doesn't bother buying a security product at all, they are by default rolled into the 300 million customers, right? That, whatever you want to call it, for Microsoft, which really what you're saying is this is an enterprise or a group of people who decided that they didn't need to buy a security product at all. And there is an aspect of this where we need to sit back and go, it's not reputational damage to a given company. It is reputational damage in some ways to the notion of having an add-on security product. And that is something for all of us to consider. That isn't something that we should be dissuading
issue
folks
for you
on.
guys, right?
Well, there's plenty of them, especially when you talk about Microsoft as simultaneously the incumbent and the person that controls the entire ecosystem. Like, there is this antitrusty kind of pressure there that goes with, this time around, let's say there might have been an unfortunate Windows update that makes some kernel interoperability fail, but that's also just entirely within Microsoft's control to also block off, right? Like, Apple has already done it. Mac OS does not allow any kind of like interactions with the kernel in ways that make most security products moot on Mac OS. And Microsoft could decide to do that tomorrow, and you would have a pretty interesting battle to wage at that point.
And they'd have an excuse to do it as well.
Well, they could have the appearance of one. Sure.
Fair. Costin, you got a thought on this? I mean, because this whole antitrust issue and the fact that Windows Defender, I mean, the old employer used to be suing Microsoft several times over this antitrust issue and getting Windows Defender bundled into. And then slowly over time, it kind of went away, and we all accepted that Windows Defender is now an anti-malware product provided by the platform provider. Do you see any sort of implications here from the CrowdStrike outage? The fact that it's this fragile dependence on how the global economy depends on a single software update in such a significant way, and this cascading effect just, I don't know where do we stand?
It's a good question, and I saw like a couple of people joking on Twitter like this is Judgment Day, the day when AI takes over, like decides to take advantage of this and just take over humanity. It's the beginning of the end. Maybe it was not this time, right? We're still here. What I think is there's like several points from, let's say, the perspective of someone who's been in this field for a long time. back in the days, we were seeing that some companies that would appear out of nowhere, maybe small companies, maybe 50 employees, copy detections from another solution, like let's say one that has been around for decades, get almost the same level of detection very quickly, win in all the tests, gain a couple of government customers, and then just sell the solution for $1 billion. So this was like super typical. What you get, I think, from this is, let's say, two possibilities. One is that innovation happens because they need to innovate. They need to create new solutions to build world-class detection with 50 people. That's one thing that happens, innovation. The other one, is kind of a risk. So it's like, going through a very narrow corridor where the risk is, to crash into the walls at any moment because you can't take care of everything. There is for sure less reliability and more opportunities to crash with this kind of new software and the new paradigms where companies, just cook software overnight, they boost it on steroids and they sell it and move on. So yeah, that's a risk. I think the probability of this happening with bigger names would be smaller because it happened in the past. Then the CEO decided that if this happens again, everybody loses their jobs. So everyone is like scared to shit of pushing updates on a Friday or pushing updates before they test it on their wife's computers first, and then deliver it to the users.
Just to close the loop on this story, we believe there are two separate incidents, right? Like an Azure outage and this CrowdStrike incidents, because there's some ambiguity there of the Azure connection thing. Help me understand what you know, Costin.
So here's what we have from Microsoft. The Microsoft O365 outage started exactly on July 18th at 9:56 p.m. UTC. And then we have, let's say, kind of an indication also from Microsoft. They say that if you are affected by the CrowdStrike issue, then you need to restore from a backup before 7 p.m. UTC. So that's roughly like 3 hours before the MS 365 outage.
Okay.
So there's a window of about 3 hours. The first one for sure was the CrowdStrike outage, and then in those 3 hours, something happened, and Office 365 was affected as well. Were they related? Hard to say. I don't know.
Close the loop on this one. Let's move on quickly to the next story.
I mean, the broader conversation to have about, like, to have here is some Dan Gear monoculture issue to discuss, right? And that's a much broader conversation we've had in other contexts, and that is an issue regardless of who the particular security vendor is. But I think that might be zooming out a little too much for what we have to discuss now.
A little too far. Are we discussing this next week, or is this a story that kind of people recover, the stock price recovers? I mean, the stock is down 10% the last time I checked today. The stock is probably going to recover by the end of the week.
Sure.
Next Friday, we're recording this podcast. This is a footnote, or are we still in the throes of CrowdStrike
you glossed
mess?
over an attempt at murdering a president.
I'm trying to get there. I'm trying to understand.
My point is, like, yes, that's the news cycle we're on. By next week, God knows what reality is going to look like.
Which segs perfectly into...
Last point.
Go.
Last point. Like, here's a question. I like unanswered questions. Will this lead to another Satya Nadella open letter to all the employees, like reliability first, or reliability before anything else? That would be interesting to see.
I mean, the last one didn't do shit, so...
Does Microsoft use this news competitively against CrowdStrike?
That's a good question.
I don't think it's a good look for Microsoft either. Like, let's be honest here, right? You can try to point to CrowdStrike entirely and say, hey, like, these guys caused this. Sure, why not? But the other side of this is the reason that you need safe boot and concern about BitLocker and whatnot is, like, we are talking about what it's like to get into these, like, moments of instability with the kernel, where, like, maybe it takes 143 reboots before the system, somehow just magically self-heals. But the fact that there is this, like I said, I don't know what the change is. I don't know how hardcore the problem is, but like we're at Windows 11 and still like one third-party kernel driver not going super well means that your computer is like perma screwed and someone else has to come like physically intervene. It's not a good look for Microsoft either, right?
And I think there's also not a simple fix for this would be, let's say, if Windows notices that it's stuck in a reboot loop with a blue screen due to cs agent.sys, like happening a dozen times. How about like, just offering the option to boot without the faulty driver?
Yeah.
It's super easy. And you just reboot it 10 times. If it's the same CS agent says blue screening, just boot without that. People at least can fix their computers.
Yeah, there's something there. Because otherwise we would, like, if that were not happening, then everything else is like just a live update fix, right?
I'm going to move on. Last week, the top story last week that we discussed in detail last week was this AT&T mega breach with these call records that ended up in a Snowflake database somewhere. The follow-up, obviously, there have been two follow-ups. One, Wired reported, Kim Zetter at Wired reported that AT&T paid a $370,000 ransom to the hacker to delete the stolen data, and she has some reporting on some videos that shows that he deleted it. And then 404 Media reported that this guy, John Binns, who was previously associated with the T-Mobile hack in 2021, is the guy who is responsible for this. He's currently detained in Turkey, which kind of matches the previous reporting on an arrest that we had talked about. And is currently facing extradition to the U.S. A lot to untangle here. What jumps out at you here? This notion of paying $370K to get something deleted from somebody who is acting as a cyber criminal just feels bananas to me. But what jumps out at you here? Nobody.
I think we're just sort of staring off into the distance, right? Because
it's a very small amount of money, if you ask me. Like so-called professional ransomware teams, they would be like charging what, 37 million, like for
sure.
the first call, right? 37 million, and maybe they'll bring it down to $15 million. 370 sounds like wannabe cyber criminal. Kind of a ransom.
Let me flip that on its head. It's $370,000 to film yourself supposedly deleting some data, right? Like it is a lot of money for performance art in a sense, right? This is why the double extortion mechanism is sort of so effective and terrifying in a way. And if you look at some of like the Lapsus guys, like in the beginning. Kids, I should say, they were even trying to extort just with access to the data, no ransomware whatsoever. But this is sort of the sort of disappointing side of what's been going on with ransomware over the past, 5 years or so, which is to say, like, your data is out. We're talking about remediating in normal situations, right? Not the AT&T breach, but in normal situations, you're talking about like, okay, well, let's get past the ransomware aspect of it. So let's get the machines decrypted. Let's get people operational again. But the part that nobody wants to talk about is, okay, well, the data is out and it is somewhere out there. And, what's going to happen with that data? There's a much bigger issue here. And again, we're getting way further away from the AT&T part, but there's this like honor among thieves mentality to the notion of like, well, you have a bunch of my PII, a bunch of my customer data, a bunch of my design documents, whatever it is, intellectual property that's valuable. It's in the hands of some Russian, cybercrime gang. It's being hosted on some CDN that like God knows who manages. And I'm being assured that this data is being deleted because I paid X amount of money. In this case, AT&T at least got a little video. In most cases, you just get a promise, that, Slava has decided that he doesn't care about your data anymore. And the part that we haven't talked about is that there's a whole ecosystem of black market data coming from ransomware breaches that we have not seen openly monetized and therefore are just assuming is being deleted, even though like it's a treasure trove that it's just sort of vanishing somewhere. It's not being leveraged by nation states. It's not making its way to intelligence agencies. It's not making its way to competitors. it's not being monetized at all. It's just being deleted in the blink of an eye over like a criminal's promise. And that part has always been deeply uncomfortable to me. It almost seems like a form of self-delusion. This isn't the situation, like the AT&T thing isn't the situation where we're gonna necessarily have a reckoning about it, but I do think we're being massively naive in these situations.
Are we very, very quick to downplay it now because we know it's a John Binns and it's an American guy who was just like there and there's no... Do we downplay these things because, like you just said, there are no nation-state implications, there are no big sort of national security things? This is just, okay, this is data theft and a guy was able to grab some money and this is a smaller story than it actually is?
I think we're downplaying it because we're downplaying all of those situations. We don't know how to discuss the intrinsic value of information, and therefore it's easier to just kind of package this as some like edge case of what happens in these situations and then move on because we don't want to, we don't really know what to do with it. But look, again, John Binns, AT&T to the side. Let's talk about ransomware as a whole. What happens with these mega breaches of ransomware? You are telling me that a financially motivated actor has gotten access to, 40 terabytes worth of important data out of an enterprise. And you pay this money, so it's gone away. They are not going to take that data to your competitors. They're not going to try to take that data to other companies trying to do whatever. They're not going to try to take that data to Chinese manufacturers who are more than happy to try to take advantage of your processes, intellectual property, etc. They're not going to take that data to their FSB handler somewhere and say, hey, are you interested in X, Y, and Z? Like, we're saying there's no national security or like whatever implications because we're not seeing them overtly manifested in a way. But it's almost, again, it's a convenient self-delusion. It's fucking ridiculous to think that these people who are financially motivated are not going to turn around and try to curry favor or make more money from what they already have in their hands. It makes no sense.
The reporting says this is believed to be the only complete set of the data stolen. Do we just accept that? I mean,
Sure. Why not? Why not? Right? Sure. Okay. Just like, yeah, okay. Why not?
What are nearly all of AT&T's call records doing in the Snowflake database that's poorly protected? Did we ever get an answer to that? And can we understand this? Juan, by the way, I re-listened to the last episode and I got a bunch of feedback from incoming flack from guests who are listening to it and following very, very closely. And there's a big pushback on you saying, oh, AT&T should be commended for being forthcoming here. And this is like, all right, where are we that nearly all call records are in an unprotected account and we're
Well, it's not okay. Sorry, it's not like I'm dying to say that like to hand out like participation trophies to people. I'm just saying like AT&T has a good research security team and they are being forthcoming, and I will take that over all of the other bullshit vendor responses that we get about, like, for example, T-Mobile.
Yeah, but if you're going to use the sorry, if you're going to use the word forthcoming, can we get the answers to like the actual questions?
I think that we have questions that are not necessarily, they're more to do with a lack of familiarity with what normally happens in the operations of these places. Snowflake is a data warehouse that is used by many mega corporations to warehouse their data. Like, I don't know that I necessarily look at that and go, there's something nefarious or a bad practice about them having their call records in that place as opposed to some other place. Obviously, there's something wrong with how that data is being secured, which is why we're having this conversation. And one thing that I think I probably should have gone, kind of given more credence to was sort of this notion of, okay, well, Snowflake was not allowing you to have the right kind of granular controls to have MFA enforced across all these different accounts. And like, sure, there seems to be some granular ACLs problem there. I'm not claiming there's nothing wrong. I'm just saying I can see how putting your data in a data warehouse is a part of normal operations for a company.
Not MFAing it, not having it properly encrypted, having a John Binns having access to it, and ending up in this is like you got to do better than that.
Bro, I'm not saying everything's fine. I'm not saying things are fine.
Costin, you're itching to jump in here. Go.
It's again a reflection of the complexity of our world nowadays, which is it's a crazy combination. It's like a house of cards, with data sitting unsecured in a cloud that is protected by an agent who is updated from, I don't know, somewhere else by people who are paid, I don't know, $1 per hour. Like this crazy combination of things. And all of them, they're like probably all of them have a weakness, and it's just kind of waiting for someone to who is knowledgeable, or either somebody knowledgeable or somebody who is, I don't know, patient enough to just try all the options. This reminds me like of the old times with Romanian hacker Guccifer, who he hacked the accounts, Yahoo accounts of different people, like including U.S. government officials and so on. And like his method was very simple. Like he would just, for instance, when one of the security questions was, what is the name of the street where you grew up? And he just tried all the street names in that city. So he was just like that patient, and simply just went through every single street names in the city where that person was born. So,
just to clarify, this is Guccifer 1.0.
1.0, absolutely. The real,
right.
the real Guccifer.
The real cab driver Romanian Guccifer. Right?
Combining the style of Gucci and the light of Lucifer, in his own words.
That's true. Did you watch? Did you guys watch Leave the World Behind? Like, I feel like I should have put it in the show notes. Ryan, have you seen this
nice
thing?
One.
Dude, I watched this last week, and I feel like I fucked up. Like, it was such a mistake. But
no spoilers, but it's worth. It's a recommend.
It's recommended, but like, I don't know, get high afterwards, do something to like help yourself, because it's
one of
those.
It's a fucking downer. Watch Friends, right? It is a downer, but it's very much in line with what we're discussing now. Sort of this notion of, to what extent we're always at a near point of catastrophic failure, and there's a difference between a confluence of events that puts us in a situation like today versus just how not too far down the line it is to do so on purpose in some ways.
Yeah. I'm going to switch gears to the next story on our list that we wanted to talk a little bit about today. Is the story you've been pining for. The FBI announced that they've successfully gained access to the password-protected phone of the deceased suspect in the assassination attempt of the former president, is Thomas Matthew Crooks. What do we know? Do we know if it's an iPhone or an Android, first off the bat?
Yeah, it appears it was a Samsung phone.
Okay, so it appears it was a Samsung phone. Do we know if they had the password and they just the parents had the password, they punched in the password, they used his thumbprint, the dead man's thumbprint? Is that even possible at all? I'm trying to
celebrate. Come on, man.
That's what I'm trying to get to. Are we back into the old we need to break encryption to get into software debate over this, or we just law enforcement has their tools and their tools do law enforcement things, and that's what it's meant for?
Well, I remember us talking about this like earlier this week. We were like exactly sure: is it an iPhone? Is it an Android phone? What is it? Will they rely on the Mark DAO, the zero-day exploit, the one they used in the San Bernardino case? Does it still work? The same zero-day still works? We don't know. Or
Mark
are they going to bite again? Mark DAO still works, of course. Like, did they ask him again to write one? There were like a lot of unclear things, but now luckily it's a bit more clear that they did actually use the kind of experimental Celebrite version. On the standard one couldn't unlock the phone.
We should have known it was an Android phone when they didn't need Marked Out. They could just go with Celebrite, right? Like it is.
Or that was the first clue, right?
Or when they didn't start suing Apple to unlock all the Apple phones in the world.
Give them time. Give them time.
Give them time. There was this worrying line for sure that the shooter used encrypted comms. This immediately attracted my attention when I read it. This is almost like preparing the ground for another kind of ban on encrypted communication. I mean, Seriously, nowadays everything is encrypted. WhatsApp is encrypted, right? iMessages are encrypted. So when you say that the shooter used encrypted comms, I mean
He just used
4G,
he just
4G
used a
is
messaging
encrypted.
tool. Yeah.
Yeah, like everything is encrypted. So this is like so wide, and in my opinion, so misleading, but kind of preparing the ground for, yeah, the shooter used encrypted comms, so we need to ban encryption.
But I
That
gotta say though, the
and
argument
CSAM.
that the availability of a Dowd and the availability of Celebrite and these tools also tell us that we don't need encryption broken. We have access. We
Absolutely.
have places and we have
It's all
ways to
bullshit.
access.
Yeah, that's all bullshit.
It's always honestly it's why the FBI's approach to this has always come off as ham-fisted, and it was in the San Bernardino case as well, right? Like my understanding is that the FBI soured their relationship with Apple, where they could have gotten a fair amount of collaboration in the past, and they did quietly, but instead they decided to try to do this in the courts and try to make a public showing of it, particularly for this, anti-encryption, these attempts at having like landmark cases against encryption. And instead what they did was just shoot themselves in the foot, as always, and end up having to go pay somebody else to get it done. Like they've always had this option of going, A, quietly asking for help, B, going to pay for your marked out, break glass, get marked out in here. And instead, they want to make these big showings of trying to go against encryption. And we all know that it's an absolutely idiotic notion, but apparently that kind of common sense is not so common at Quantico or wherever.
Just very quick reminder that Apple actually offered to unlock that specific phone. They refused to give FBI like a full backdoor access to all phones, but they said sure. However, the FBI never asked Apple to unlock that specific phone. So I think, the whole fight was about a bigger thing, just allowing FBI to have like this universal backdoor into all iPhones.
Yeah,
This conversation pops up and disappears over time though. This whole police need encryption, the feds need to break encryption. We really can't break it, and then it goes through these loops and we have these long conversations. This is just another example of it popping up. You expect anything to change here?
There's a reason it keeps popping up, which is that they do hope that it will change. Like, I think the mentality, and this happens in the EU, it happens in the UK, it happens here, right? There's this kind of concerted effort of like, yeah, if we just kind of keep at it, something's going to chink, something's going to break, which, I think we all, at least on our side of the house, realize how stupid and self-defeating this is. This is the same technology that's protecting you from like a massive counterintelligence perspective, all kinds of operational failures and problems that they can't even begin to imagine. And frankly, like the day they succeed in breaking this, will start the counter on when they'll start begging for it to come back. But that doesn't mean they're not trying, right? The conversation is going to be had over and over again.
The last thing on my list I wanted us to talk about was Pwn2Own announcing that WhatsApp OD exploits, zero-click, one-click exploits will now be up in the contest. And the prices is what I wanted us to discuss. The price tag for a WhatsApp zero-click exploit listed at 300,000. Costin, I know you've been tracking a lot of these exploit prices. You and I have worked on reports in the past on some of these companies and how these prices are a thing. That number sounds very, very small to me as a 300K price for something that valuable. Does that surprise you?
It doesn't surprise me in the sense that this is like official, money on the table, right? It's an official, kind of official contest. Pretty much the high prices that you read about in other places, they're usually they're very shady deals. With money in cryptocurrency, or it's either half in cryptocurrency and the Tesla, or like all sorts of shady deals, right? For the payment. I think that there was a point when Zerodium was saying like, we'll pay you in anything, like anything you can imagine. I don't know, maybe even gold. But to me, the price, it looks okay. What is important to know in these situations is that usually That's like there's like a kind of redefined print. That's possibly or potentially the maximum price, right? But in many cases, they're not paying the maximum price for that. The exploit has to be, I don't know, reliable. It needs to work on all versions, like the latest versions. While in practice, the exploit is not reliable, or it requires maybe 1,000 messages to work. So the reliability is, I don't know, somewhere around 1% or 0.5%. So that's what actually brings the price down. Now, for a full zero-click chain, let's say for WhatsApp, full click, um, fully reliable, works on all versions, works on the latest Samsung phones and iPhones. I think the real price for that is much higher, probably in the range of $1 million, $2 million dollars for the reliable full chain. If it's just, again, this is like the zero click, 1,000 attempts, then the price kind of
And those
sounds
full
decent
chains
to
are
me.
the ones that pop into those surveillance spyware, mercenary
Yeah,
spyware tools, right? I
yeah.
mean, that's why this topic is this WhatsApp all day is on here, is because that we see zero clicks popping up in the use of those surveillance mercenary spyware tools. If that's the high value of those bugs, why would someone come to Pwn to Own to give away a WhatsApp or click for 300K? But you're saying it's the chain that's the value.
Yes, but it's also for reputation. The moment that you do this and like your name is out there, then automatically you that's like a badge that you can wear, and then you can start selling to other kind of buyers out there, either private exploit buying companies or governments directly. There's cases, I know cases of people who are actually trying to sell 0 days, and yeah, you probably know them as well. Advertising them on Twitter, nobody wants to buy. Like nobody cares. Nobody will risk talking to such people or buying from them directly, unless they know that these are reputable researchers and that they are reliable. In the sense, they will not talk to Andy Greenberg or take photos of themselves with a bag of cash or with the bitcoins or gold or whatever, right? So like all
Leave
these
the
Leave
things are
grug
grug
important.
alone, man.
alone. Leave the
Leave
grug
the
alone.
It's
Dude,
my
leave
guy.
that
No,
poor
no.
man.
Yeah.
It's been like a fucking decade. Leave him alone.
That picture, he still hits that
That
picture.
fucking picture, dude. Yeah.
Um, Mandian dropped a report yesterday. I don't know if it's big in your world. I actually wrote a small piece about it, about APT41, like a resurgence of like real dedicated activity. This is WinNTI Shadowpad guys. Um, there was a line in there about expanding targeting beyond just media houses and some of the other places. It seems like this is a dual role group that does either cybercrime or espionage. Costin, should we pay attention to the resurgence of APT41, or this is just another one of those APTs that work round the clock?
Well, it's of course a blast from the past, if you want. I personally, I always I found it very confusing that companies out there, they were having like different names for the side of this group. Let's call it this group that was doing the gaming targeting, the gaming industry targeting, stealing virtual items. Or creating virtual items, in-game items out of nowhere, and the other one that was doing the sponsored, state-sponsored espionage for MSS. I found it like very confusing. It was essentially, yeah, the same people, but kind of not the same, and having like two jobs. I really like the fact when Mantian came and they said, like, it's just one thing, APT41. There's just one thing. We'll put everything into just one umbrella, and that's what it is, APT41. And I think that's a much easier to understand solution, and it's much easier to take everything into consideration and understand what these guys are doing. Sometimes, leveraging one thing for another, like exploiting a gaming company to obtain access to user information that can allow them to do targeting of other companies out there, or supply chain attacks, of course. So yeah,
Is that
this
a
is an interesting
convenient
resurgence.
construction? Like, is it an accurate construction, or is it just a convenient thing? And I won't. I'm not in any way casting Mandiant's research into doubt, but more their ontology when it comes to these types of entities, which is to say that Mandiant is much more comfortable. For example, when we talk about Sandworm, they're much more comfortable saying, "Hey, this is an APT group," but there are 4 operational groups
Mhm.
umbrellaed under it, right? Like when it comes to APT 41. APT 41, or if you before when you may have called them Winty, which is not a thing that we do anymore. Um, the complexity at the time was Winty is a cyber espionage group moonlighting, doing financial activities like kind of crime at night, and and then you've had folks who've like split them up into separate groups, right? Lead and barium, and you've had folks like there's all kinds of ways in which this sort of like it's a very complicated from an ontological perspective. Like it's just complicated to say how does this group split up, how should we be categorizing them. They're like not just dual activity, but there does seem to be like multiple subgroups involved and then multiple types of activity involved. And maybe it's more a reflection of how, I'll say this from my personal perspective, how unintelligible the Chinese APT space can be. Like, I find it next to impossible to genuinely feel like I have a grasp on Chinese APT groups. Like, there's a handful of people whom I trust and admire, whose work seems to be just trying to keep track of what the hell that tree of actors actually looks like. But without going too far into that, is that what we see with APT 41, where it's like this is a convenient construction, but I don't know that it is a stickler for accuracy when it comes to what kind of entity we're dealing with, or are we just trying to use outdated concepts to try to explain or understand an entity that just doesn't fit within the rubric or the mold of what we're used to in the West, right? Like, is this just a group of companies or a company that is very IDGAF about its boundaries, and it does crime and it does espionage and it serves this master and this other one? Like, is that why we're having a hard time with it, or like
Well,
what part of this phenomenon are we
it's
not grasping?
I think it's always a question of visibility here, and everybody knows that of course Microsoft has the best visibility in the world. Uh, they
Not right
split
now.
not right now. uh, you're still going back to the today's incidents, I see.
Sorry.
But otherwise, they do have the best visibility in the world, and sometimes APTs wonder how did we get caught? Like, how do they know who we are? Like, well, yeah.
Yeah.
But it was always, in my opinion, a question of visibility and the ability to say here's like this subgroup and this subgroup. Like in our case, speaking from experience, we were seeing a lot of what Microsoft used to call barium. I don't know what they're calling it nowadays, storm, typhoon, something. Um, like, yeah, on top of your head, how are they calling barium today?
Oh, fuck if I know.
Nobody
I don't know.
knows.
Nobody knows.
And we were seeing a lot of barium, and we were seeing like zero, the other thing, lead, zero,
Lead,
like
right?
yeah, nothing. We were seeing like tons of barium, zero lead. So like if you ask me, like different companies out there, again, they have different visibility, and yeah, if you can put them in the same bucket, lucky you. But otherwise, for us, it was just barium, like just one thing. We couldn't talk about the other because there was like no visibility.
Interesting. Let me give Juan a chance to talk a little bit about your team. SentinelLabs put out a report on null budge. What is null budge? Why should we care about it?
Jim Walter did fantastic work on this null bulge post. The reason null bulge, I think, is kind of top of mind for some folks is they recently put out a great deal of like leaked data on Disney. But what makes null bulge a particularly interesting entity is they seem to exist in this kind of bizarre space where it's a financially motivated actor as far as we can tell, but they are claiming to be sort of rebelling against AI and and sort of the notion of like, what AI is doing to artists and whatnot. And apparently the way to fight that is with like ransomware and leaking data and whatnot. So it's just sort of like it's a very interesting entity, and sort of seeing them live in this sort of indecision space between whether they are a financially motivated actor or actually some like genuine, honest to God hacktivist crew. And their techniques are really interesting, right? We're not going to call them sophisticated by any stretch of the imagination, but they're poisoning the well. They're like out there sort of Trojanizing game mods, and like it's an interesting operation. So it's worth giving it a read. I personally don't know where to characterize them as an entity, but I have a feeling we're going to keep seeing more of them. So, looking forward to that.
And I thought it was interesting that this malicious BMG mod they were using, they relied on Lua scripts. So I know that's one thing that you hold very dear, Juan. Like there's been a lot of Lua stuff in the past that you've analyzed.
I hold Lua. I hold the use of Lua by nation states very dear, and I actually owe everyone a paper about this. Actually, for my last LabsCon talk.
Yes,
it's almost a year. I need to publish the fucking paper. Hold me to it. I'll publish it. But I'll say this: I'm fascinated by the use of Lua by nation states, but in a way, that is what makes part of it so bizarre is that Lua is very much a scripting language for games, like for game mods and stuff. So in a way, we're seeing Lua being used in its natural context by Null Bulge, as opposed to sort of the bizarre use by like, defense contractors that probably shouldn't have been fiddling with it in the first place. Right.
What's the most interesting malware using Lua in your opinion, Juan?
Oi.
Probably Project Zoran, which I've always been very fond of as an operation. Your Remsec Project Zoran Strider, but Flame will always be very near and dear to my heart. Flame 1, Flame 2.0, and then the thing that this paper was supposed to out is something called Fast16, which is the earliest use of Lua by a nation state. The sample was 3 years older than the oldest Flame sample, so it's about 2005.
Oh, wow.
It was really fascinating. And if whatever, I don't know what asshole out there has not published this paper. We'll get it out someday. But it is a really
has never been
operation.
Reported on, right? Fast16.
Not if you were not at LabsCon last year. No, it has never been reporting on.
Costin, what is your?
Grace Flame. Yeah, I mean, it's probably the first one. It's the first one that we've seen, I think, using Lua. And that remains like the most impressive package, if you want. Like, because there's like dozens of things in there. They're all impressive in one way or another.
I love
All right, guys, we're at the 1 hour mark, and I want to wrap up. Juan, I'll give you to close on LabsCon announcements yesterday, 2 keynotes, and the return of Kim Zetter as our interview speaker on stage. What can you tell us about the LabsCon keynotes?
I'm actually super excited about the LabsCon keynotes that we have announced so far. So first off, Max Smeets, dear friend who has been doing amazing work. I mean, he wrote No Shortcuts about sort of the development of military cyber commands in the EU, and now he's coming to give a bit of a preview of work he's doing in the context of actual ransomware and sort of the Conti leaks and the sort of understanding of what's happening, where I think he takes us to task, right? He's basically coming at the TI industry and sort of the effects that we're having on ransomware. Also, Ben Nemo from OpenAI is going to come talk to us about some of the special tooling they've been developing around some of the disinfo stuff, and especially in the context of the elections. So right off the bat, I think 2 really interesting, sort of fascinating talks. I don't know if they're both going to be off the record, but I've gotten some overtures in that direction. So I think I don't want to jinx it, but this could be the year of like hardcore FOMO at LabsCon, because the amount of people who want to come give off the record, like don't publish the video talks are surprisingly high. So, if you're interested in some of these things, I hope to see you there in person.
And the call for papers, the program committee voting for the call for papers is done. There are going to be some speaker announcements early next week, I expect, right?
I don't know, man. That's on you and I. So,
All right.
are we doing this? Or?
Yeah, we need to pick the talks and fix
There
the
you go.
agenda. Mr. Costin, thank you very much for your participation and voting on some of the talks. I thought your comments were
there
great.
were like a lot of interesting talks, and I think there were even a few of them about things that have never been published on. I don't want to go into details or not. Don't want to spoil anything, but I think the agenda will be a blast. Should be amazing.
Fantastic. Gentlemen, thank you very much. Go reboot your CrowdStrike machines. Help your wives.
Leave them alone. Leave them alone. They have a hard enough time right now.
In all seriousness, thank you guys. We'll talk again next week.
Thanks,
Be
everybody.
safe. If you have to travel, be careful.